Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take complex ideas from doctrine and academic work and really break them down into useful insights for you.
That's a goal.
Today, we're diving into something fundamental for leaders. What really separates okay leadership from, truly effective organizational leadership. We want to get past this idea that it's just about giving orders. Our mission today is to really dissect that crucial difference between getting temporary compliance and building genuine mission-critical commitment.
Yeah, that's the core challenge, isn't it? Especially for senior leaders. And to set the stage, we can look right at the source. Army Doctrine Publication 622. It gives a really clean definition. It defines leadership as the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation, all aimed at accomplishing the mission and improving the organization.
Influencing people, that word influence is key, isn't it? Not just directing or ordering.
Exactly. It's built right into the definition. Influence, not just raw authority.
And to explore this, we've got a great mix of sources today. We're pulling from Army Doctrine Publication 622, naturally, but also blending it with some deep academic thinking from Dr. Jean Clan's paper, The Application of Power and Influence in Organizational Leadership, and Dr. Gerald Sewell's paper on emotional intelligence in military leadership.
That's right. And we'll also touch on a really interesting case study to see how some of these dynamics play out. Who Brought Bernadine Healy Down? By Deborah Sontag from the New York Times Magazine.
So quite a mix. Military doctrine, academic analysis, real-world case study.
It gives us a good range. And the core question we really want to unpack for you, the listener, is how leaders, especially those leading through other leaders in larger organizations, how do they apply power effectively? Because it's just not enough to get a task checked off. You need that deep, lasting buy-in, that commitment, especially for the complex, high-stakes stuff we face today.
Okay, let's jump right into that fundamental split then. Compliance versus commitment. Dr. Clan really emphasizes this distinction. Why is it so critical? I mean, if someone complies, isn't that enough?
Well, it might be enough for very simple routine tasks, but compliance is really the low bar. It's just conforming to a requirement, a demand. When a leader pushes for compliance, they're usually focused on getting something done now, quickly meeting the immediate demand. And the result, you only get a change in behavior. The person does the thing, checks the box, but that's it. Their internal investment, it's minimal. They're holding back.
Okay, so compliance is external, checking the box. Why bother with commitment then? It sounds like it takes more effort, more time, maybe more relationship building.
It absolutely does. But it's worth it because commitment taps into that internal resource. Commitment isn't just behavior. It's dedication. It's allegiance to the cause, to the team, to the organization. When you achieve commitment, you get a long-term lasting change. You're influencing not just what people do, but what they think and believe. Dr. Clan puts it really well. He says committed followers take personal ownership. They have internal buy-in. They proactively dedicate themselves to getting the mission done.
Proactive dedication. That sounds like the key difference. They keep working even when you're not looking or when things go sideways.
Exactly. Dr. Clan has this great phrase. He says, their minds, hearts, and hands are really in it. It captures that whole person, voluntary investment. And critically, he points out that commitment has to be self-initiated. It's a cognitive thing, a choice the follower makes internally to invest themselves fully. The leader creates the conditions, but the follower chooses commitment.
Right. That difference really separates a bureaucracy that just ticks boxes from a truly high-performing team that can adapt, innovate, and overcome those unexpected hurdles.
Yeah, and the source material gives us a really stark historical example of this contrast. It uses Major General George Armstrong Custer.
Custer, definitely a figure known for extremes, brilliant cavalry commander in the Civil War, but then a little bighorn.
And his career really highlights this difference. During the Civil War, he led the 3rd Michigan Cavalry. These were highly motivated volunteers. They were totally committed to him, to the cause. He felt he could do anything with them. And he had this incredible track record of success because their commitment gave them initiative, that drive to perform beyond just the orders.
But that changed dramatically when he took command of the 7th Cavalry Regiment later on.
A completely different situation.
Yeah.
Later, during the American Indian Wars, his troops in the 7th Cavalry, they were often recent immigrants. Some barely spoke English, or, former criminals, guys who joined just for the paycheck. They came from, frankly, the lower elements of society at the time. They were there for employment, not allegiance. Their buy-in was essentially zero.
So just compliance, how did that lack of commitment show up on the battlefield?
Well, Custer was constantly frustrated. He complained about their lack of initiative, their competence, and to get even basic compliance, the sources say he resorted to really harsh discipline, executions even. Pure coercive power.
But coercion doesn't build skill or motivation.
No, it doesn't. And that lack of commitment translated into poor morale, poor scouting, weak unit cohesion, just a general failure to take initiative when things got tough. Dr. Klen points out this commitment gap hurt their overall competence and is cited as one factor, among many, in the disaster at Little Bighorn. It's a tough lesson. You can force behavior, but you can't force the thinking and dedication needed for complex missions. Relying only on compliance is fragile.
That Custer example really drives it home. Relying on coercion, on just forcing compliance, isn't enough when things get complicated. So to get either compliance or that deeper commitment, leaders need influence. And Dr. Klan says influence is basically the application of power. Let's dig into where that power comes from, the two main types, position power and personal power.
Right. So position power is pretty straightforward. It comes from your office, your rank, your formal title. It's granted by the organization, and it primarily gets you compliance.
Okay, what are the main tools within position power?
Well, the first one is reward power. This is your ability to influence people by controlling things they want, resources. This could be big stuff like promotions, getting selected for a cool assignment, medals. But it also includes, non-material things. Letters of appreciation, maybe just public praise, or even private acknowledgement.
So anything the leader controls that the subordinate actually values.
Exactly, and Dr. Klan points out leaders can get creative here. The types of rewards are really only limited by imagination. But there's a catch. What if the big rewards, like promotions, are just really scarce? An effective leader has to learn to shift, maybe rely more on that sincere praise, that recognition, to keep influencing when the formal rewards aren't available.
Okay, so that's reward power. What's the flip side?
The flip side is coercive power. This is influencing through the negative stuff. Punishments, taking away privileges, using fear, maybe public shaming.
Sounds like the quick and dirty way, but the sources seem really wary of it. Why is even military doctrine cautious about coercive power? Seems like a common stereotype of military leadership.
Because the ultimate goal is long-term effectiveness and commitment, not just making someone jump right now. Army Doctrine Publication 622 specifically warns that using pressure or threats too often, it just breeds resentment. It kills morale in the long run. And Dr. Klan echoes this. He warns that coercive power might get you temporary compliance, sure, but it actively destroys the foundation for commitment. Overdo it, and you risk passive-aggressive behavior, people actively working against you subtly, or just filing formal complaints. The long-term cost to the organization is usually too high.
The sources mention General Vinegar Joe Stillwell as someone known for relying on these harsh tactics. It really sounds like position power, especially the coercive side, is a blunt instrument.
It really is. So if position power drives compliance, then personal power is what truly drives commitment.
And personal power isn't assigned, right? It has to be earned from the followers.
That's the absolute key difference. Personal power comes from the followers. They grant it based on the leader's expertise or maybe just their personality, the way they carry themselves. And because it taps into respect and trust, it's incredibly effective at getting that deep commitment, influencing attitudes and beliefs. But, and this is crucial from Dr. Klan, followers can also withdraw that power. Just like that, which shows you it's fragile, it needs constant upkeep.
Makes sense. Let's break down the types of personal power.
Okay, first is expert power. This comes from your knowledge, your skills, your track record of competence. Followers respect demonstrated ability. Now, the interesting challenge, especially for organizational leaders, is that you might have people working for you, warrant officers, specialists, NCOs, who actually have more expert power in a specific technical area than you do.
Right. That's got to be tough for some leaders. I'm in command, but my sergeant knows more about this system than I do. How does a leader handle that effectively?
Well, the effective ones realize their job isn't to be the smartest person on every topic. Their skill lies in having the confidence and humility to recognize and leverage all the expertise available on the team. By actively seeking out and respecting that expertise in subordinates, the leader actually builds trust. And that trust is the direct link to the second type of personal power, referent power.
Referent power. That sounds like the gold standard of relational leadership.
It pretty much is. Referent power is all about earning the trust, the admiration, the respect of your followers. It comes from your character, your actions, your relationships. It's the power that makes people want to follow you, to be associated with you.
And the source material points to General Eisenhower as a prime example here, especially early in World War II.
Ike is a classic case study in referent power. Think about it. He lacked World War I combat experience, hadn't commanded anything bigger than a battalion before the war. Yet, in 1942, he gets picked to be the commanding general, European Theater of Operations. Huge job. Dr. Klan argues this wasn't just about his administrative skill. A huge part of it was his exceptional interpersonal ability, his relational skills.
And the context was critical, right? Coalition warfare,
Wow.
managing massive egos, Montgomery, Patton, de Gaulle, plus politicians like Churchill and Roosevelt.
Exactly. His formal position as an American general wasn't enough to command that alliance. His primary task was building and maintaining trust among incredibly competitive, often mistrustful leaders. His ability to mediate, to smooth things over, to build a shared vision that was his referent power in action, it wasn't just a nice to have. It was a strategic asset that arguably made the Allied coalition work and paved the way for victory.
But doesn't relying on referent power make a leader vulnerable? If trust is granted, it can be taken away instantly if the leader messes up, right?
That is the inherent risk of personal power. It requires constant cultivation and, frankly, integrity. Your reputation is your power base. One significant misstep, especially a public one, can just erase years of trust, which is why the most effective leaders often have to be the most self-aware. If that trust disappears, you're suddenly forced back onto relying on position power, which is far less effective and much more costly in the long run.
Okay, so we have these two sources of power, position and personal.
Hmm.
To actually use them, leaders employ specific influence tactics. Dr. Klan references work by Gary Uckel here. It's about knowing which tool to use when. Let's look at the categories: hard, soft, and rational tactics.
Right. These categories help us think about which tactic fits the situation. It depends on the power you have, who you're trying to influence, how much resistance you expect, and ultimately whether you're aiming for compliance or commitment. Think of it like a toolkit.
Let's start with the HUD tactics. These seem linked directly to position power, used when you expect pushback, or maybe time is really short.
Exactly. The first one is pressure. This means using explicit demands, setting hard deadlines, and clearly stating the negative consequences if things don't get done. Direct orders, basically. Now, Army Doctrine Publication 622 advises using this sparingly, especially outside of immediate high-stress situations like combat and garrison. Overusing pressure just creates resentment and poisons the climate. Leaders also need to be careful it doesn't come across as just them trying to look good for their boss.
So save pressure for the truly critical, time-sensitive stuff, not for routine things.
That's the guidance. The second hard tactic is legitimating. This is when you lean on your formal authority. Do this because I'm the commander, essentially. It's often used when you can't fully explain the why behind an order, maybe for security reasons or there just isn't time. By referencing your position, you're implying that not complying could lead to formal negative action.
Okay, so hard tactics get compliance but risk resentment. How do leaders build that deeper buy-in, the commitment? That must lead us to the soft tactics.
Perfect transition. Yes, soft tactics are tied directly to personal power, referent, and expert power. You use these when you're aiming for genuine commitment or when you don't expect much resistance. The goal is willing cooperation.
What's the first soft tactic? Personal appeals.
Right. This is when you make a request based on your relationship, friendship, loyalty, mutual trust built over time. Dr. Klan notes these appeals are often for tasks that fall outside someone's normal job description, like asking a team member to stay late to help out a colleague, not because it's required, but based on that personal connection. It taps right into that referent power capital. If they agree, their commitment goes way up.
And the other key soft tactic is participation.
Hugely important for commitment. This is when you actively involve followers in the process. Ask them to join in planning, problem solving, or making a decision. The sources emphasize this, makes people feel valued. Their ideas matter. And because they help shape the plan or the solution, their buy-in is much stronger. It empowers them and builds that commitment.
Okay, hard tactics for compliance, soft tactics for commitment. What about the middle ground, the rational tactics?
Rational tactics often bridge that gap. They appeal to logic, evidence, reason. You often use these when dealing with peers or when the action benefits both parties. They can lead from initial compliance toward eventual commitment.
What falls under rational?
First is rational persuasion. This is where you provide the context, the logical argument. You explain why the request makes sense, how it fits into the bigger picture or achieves the goal. Army Doctrine Publication 622 points out this works best when the leader is already seen as credible, as an expert. The logic lands better coming from someone who knows their stuff. The goal is to get the person to intellectually agree that the task is necessary.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's apprising.
Apprising is when you explain how carrying out the order or task will benefit the subordinate personally or the team directly. It's about showing them what's in it for them. For instance, explaining that taking on a tough project will give them great experience for their career, maybe make them more competitive for a promotion or a special school down the line.
Hmm. That sounds really close to the last one, exchange. If I tell someone, do this well and it'll look great on your evaluation, is that a prizing or exchange? How do we tell them apart?
Yeah, that's a common point of confusion. But the distinction is important. It comes down to whether the leader has direct control over the benefit being offered. Apprising describes a benefit that's likely to happen as a consequence of the action, like gaining experience, saving time, later things the leader doesn't directly hand out. Exchange, on the other hand, is a straight-up quid pro quo. You do this for me, and I will give you this specific thing in return. The leader must control the reward being offered.
Got it. So if I say, finish this report by Friday and I'll make sure you get Monday off, that's exchange because I control the leave schedule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I say, finish this report, and the visibility you get will really help your promotion chances next year, that's surprising. I believe it's true, but I don't personally control the promotion board. Exchange is very common, very practical. Dr. Klan notes, though, it only works if the subordinate actually believes you can and will deliver on your promise. Break that trust, and the tactic backfires, hurting your credibility. The source mentions Senator Bob Dole being a master of exchange in the political arena, highlighting its use outside the military, too.
Wow. Looking at all these tactics, hard, soft, rational stuff, it's clear that just having power isn't enough. Choosing the right tactic for the right situation seems critical. And making that choice, that sounds like it requires a lot of, well, skill beyond just technical knowledge.
It absolutely does. Picking the right influence tactic, knowing when to push for compliance versus when to invest in building commitment, that requires a huge amount of self-awareness, understanding others, managing relationships. That whole skill set, that's emotional intelligence, or EI.
And Dr. Klan flags emotional intelligence as the key enabler for using these influence tactics effectively. Without it, even a technically brilliant leader can fail.
That's exactly right. Competence and position power can be completely undermined by low emotional intelligence. A leader might default to a hard tactic like pressure, when a simple personal appeal would have worked better and built more goodwill just because they couldn't read the situation or manage their own frustration.
And we have a really powerful, maybe even tragic historical example of this, a failure in emotional intelligence costing a leader dearly.
It's the cautionary tale of General George S. Patton, Jr., widely regarded as a brilliant tactician, highly driven. But Dr. Klan points out he had significant gaps in emotional intelligence, especially empathy and self-control. This became devastatingly public in Sicily in 1943 when he slapped two soldiers who were hospitalized and suffering from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder.
And this wasn't just a momentary lapse in private. It was a public display, under scrutiny, that showed a fundamental lack of empathy for his own soldier's condition.
The consequences were enormous. It showed just how fragile that personal power, that referent power, can be. Despite his battlefield successes in Sicily, Patton was effectively sidelined. He was out of major command for nearly a year, from August 43 to August 44. Dr. Klan really stresses the impact. This emotional intelligence failure kept him out of the initial Normandy invasion command structure, stopped him from getting an Army Group command early on, and ultimately cost him his fifth star. A massive price for a failure of self-control and situational empathy.
It really hammers home that leadership isn't just about tactics and strategy. It's deeply emotional, built on trust and perception.
Absolutely. And it shows that just having the rank, the position power, isn't enough if you lose the trust and support of the organization and the public. The political fallout from his lack of empathy forced his removal, his genius on the battlefield notwithstanding.
But the hopeful part here is that emotional intelligence isn't fixed, right? It's described as a skill set. That means it can be learned, developed.
Yes, that's the good news. Both Dr. Sewell and Dr. Klan emphasize this. Leaders can improve their emotional intelligence. It takes conscious effort. Observing and imitating leaders who are emotionally intelligent is one way. And, importantly, learning from the mistakes of those who aren't. Seeking out honest feedback from bosses, peers, and critically from subordinates is vital, even if it's uncomfortable. And then there's focused self-development. Reading, workshops, maybe using assessment tools. It requires deliberate practice and reflection, just like any other leadership skill.
Okay, let's scale this up now. Moving to the organizational level, leading large teams, leading through subordinate leaders. How do these power and influence dynamics play out when you're managing complex systems and setting the tone for an entire organization?
Well, at the organizational level, leaders first face a significant intellectual challenge. As Army Doctrine Publication 622 points out, they have to take complex, sometimes vague, strategic guidance and translate it into clear, executable plans for the subordinate teams. This requires leveraging their intellect, which the doctrine breaks down into key components like mental agility and sound judgment.
Let's unpack those a bit. Mental agility at that level, what does that look like day to day?
Mental agility means thinking flexibly, adapting quickly when the situation changes, which it always does. It's being able to shift your focus smoothly between the big picture strategy, the operational planning, and maybe specific tactical issues without getting bogged down or losing the thread. For an organizational leader, it could mean going from a high-level budget meeting straight into providing clear guidance to a unit facing an unexpected crisis and doing both effectively. It's about being ready to pivot when the original plan isn't working.
And sound judgment, that sounds absolutely critical when you're dealing with high stakes and incomplete information.
It is. Sound judgment is about accurately assessing situations, understanding the risks, and drawing logical conclusions, even when the information is fuzzy or contradictory. Army Doctrine Publication 622 makes a really important point here. Sometimes, especially in really tough situations, there aren't any good options. The best you could do is make the least bad decision possible. Sound judgment involves weighing those second and third order effects, understanding your people's capabilities, and making the best call you can with what you know. It's where experience really meets intellectual horsepower.
And the doctrine puts a huge emphasis on the organizational leader's role in creating a positive environment, right? And maintaining accountability within that environment.
Yes, this is a fundamental ongoing responsibility. How a leader behaves, what they say, what they do, what they tolerate, sends powerful signals throughout the organization. It shapes the whole organizational climate. A positive climate fosters cohesion, trust, and that crucial commitment we've been talking about, all aligned with the organization's values. Leaders need to actively monitor this climate, using tools like surveys, sure, but also by paying attention to indicators like disciplinary issues, retention rates, how people treat each other.
What about the opposite? When a leader's behavior actually harms the environment?
The source material is very direct about the damage caused by counterproductive leadership. It's seen as the ultimate killer of commitment and trust. Army Doctrine Publication 622 outlines several types of behaviors that fall into this category.
Let's name them, because seeing the specific behaviors makes the danger feel more real.
Okay, first there's abusive behavior. Things like bullying, public humiliation, ridicule, anything that tears people down. Then, self-serving behavior. Leaders who are arrogant, put their own careers ahead of the mission or their people, maybe steal credit for others' work. That destroys referent power instantly. Third is erratic behavior. Leaders who are wildly inconsistent, prone to angry outbursts, unpredictable. This erodes trust because people don't know what to expect. It's a clear sign of low emotional intelligence.
And there are a couple more.
Yes, incompetent behavior. This could be due to neglecting duties or just clearly lacking the skills and experience needed for the job. And finally, corrupt behavior. Actively breaking rules or violating ethical standards for personal gain or to make the unit look good dishonestly.
Any of those sound like they would completely undermine commitment, forcing everyone back into just doing the minimum to avoid trouble. Pure compliance mode.
Absolutely lethal to a healthy organization. Counterproductive leadership doesn't just make people unhappy. It directly degrades readiness and the ability to accomplish complex missions long term. It systematically destroys morale and trust. And the doctrine is clear. Everyone in the organization, regardless of rank, has a responsibility to address and confront these behaviors when they see them, because they harm the entire institution.
This connects directly to that case study we mentioned earlier, who brought Bernadine Healy down, about her time as director of the National Institutes of Health. Even without knowing all the internal details, we can use this framework of power, influence, and climate to analyze the challenges she faced.
Right. High-profile, high-stakes organizations like that are really vulnerable when leaders lean too heavily on their position power and fail to cultivate personal power. The reports about Healy's tenure mention lots of conflict, political battles, becoming isolated from key scientists and stakeholders. This suggests, from the outside looking in, perhaps a failure to build or maintain the necessary referent power.
And if an organizational leader, especially one at the top of a large, complex bureaucracy, doesn't create that shared understanding the doctrine talks about, or loses the trust of key subordinates and peers, the climate just tanks.
It erodes very quickly. The case suggests maybe an over-reliance on positional authority to push through changes, without sufficiently using soft tactics like participation or personal appeals to build buy-in first. When a leader becomes isolated like that, they lose access to the vital expert power held by others in the organization. And as Dr. Clant said, commitment means followers want the organization to succeed. If that desire is replaced by resentment or political infighting, which is really just a form of passive noncompliance, the whole organization becomes fragile. It risks failure. No matter how smart the leader or how good the stated goals are, you've got to build the relationships first.
So we started this deep dive looking at how effective leadership is really about influence, not just giving orders, moving beyond compliance to build commitment. As we wrap up, what's the single biggest takeaway you want our listener to hold on to from this discussion?
I think the core lesson is that influence is the application of power, but truly effective, sustainable leadership demands a conscious shift in which power source you rely on most. It requires the continuous effort, the willingness, to move beyond the blunt instrument of position power, which mostly gets compliance at the cost of potential resentment, towards mastering personal power, which earns that deep commitment, fosters initiative, and builds resilience. The doctrine itself, Army Doctrine Publication 632, is clear. Leaders must constantly work on themselves, study, reflect, seek feedback, and importantly, embrace humility to recognize where they need to improve.
So it's not just about knowing the rules or the tactics. It's about the harder work of developing emotional intelligence, building trust, and creating an environment where people don't just follow orders, but actually want to achieve the mission, want to make the organization better. And that often requires a level of vulnerability many leaders aren't comfortable with.
Precisely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to reflect on this week. Think about your current role. Is there a specific area, maybe a recurring task or interaction, where you feel you're mostly getting compliance, maybe grudging compliance? What's one specific, maybe small action you could take this week? Applying some humility and maybe some expert or referent power to try and shift that interaction towards building genuine commitment. Could you ask for input, provide more context using rational persuasion, offer sincere personal appeal? Something to think about.